Season 3 is almost here, and the winter update is almost at its end, which means it's time for our regularly scheduled retrospective of whatever the current season is. Of course, we've done this for both Season 1 and Season 2, and the winter update was kind of its own Season 2.5 thing. It's weird, but it's a big enough of an update where I think it deserved its own retrospective video before we move on to the next big season. And this time around, I wanted to change a few things up to improve the quality of the video overall, and to just make it a much more entertaining experience. First of all, rather than going in the timeline order of events, I'm just going to break everything up into categories. We'll have a section for different modes, maps, and customization, etc, etc. Each thing will be in its own category, and we'll go over all the important factors within that category. And hopefully I don't miss any important details out this time around. I'll also be giving an overall rating at the end of the video too, which I didn't do in the last ones, but kinda wish that I did. So stick around to the end to see what rating I give the winter update as a whole. Anyway, without wasting any more of your time, let's jump straight in. Starting off with one of the smaller categories, let's talk about the customization. Now, although I say one of the smaller categories, I believe I mean the less impactful area, as there's still a lot to talk about in regards to customization, the things that were added and the changes that were made, but I would argue there is much more impactful things that were added across the winter update. The overall focus when it came to the update itself was bringing back many beloved Reach cosmetics and overall just fleshing out the Mark 5B core much more. As soon as the update released, we got the addition of the Revian Werewolf shoulders, which were completely brand new cosmetics that weren't from Reach, but they were only for this core, and they have sort of mixed opinions on them. Personally, when they first came out, I quite liked them, but as I've had them for longer and longer, I'm not too sure how I feel about them. But they are still a pretty unique cosmetic, and they gave people much more variety for this core. Speaking of which, we also had the Winter Update Battle Pass. Unlike prior ones, this one was only 30 tiers, however it was completely free. Yes, there were still some filler cosmetics in there like the Brooch armor emblem, and there was still a few double XP boosts, but for the most part I think this is a solid pass. It brought back 3 iconic helmets including CQB, CQC and the Mark 5, as well as some cool shoulder pads like Security and Grenadier, and overall just added some cool things. I was a little disappointed that there was only one coating, and there was still a few cosmetics that we knew were in the game that were still missing, but we'll get to that later. So although the pass itself left a lot to be desired, and personally I think it should have been maybe 40 to 50 tiers instead of 30, I myself and many other fans were pretty happy with it. And the reception for the most part was largely positive. After all, it was completely free, and it meant any new players that came to the game instantly had access to this pretty nice free battle pass that would flesh out their Mark 5B core and give them some decent cosmetics. Obviously, there was visors in there too, which can be used on any core. We had both Bullfrog and the Sardianic visor. Granted, these are somewhat similar to one another, but honestly, I like them. The only coating we got was Moa Assault. This is a pretty nice brown and black coating. It's not the most visually interesting coating out of all of them, and I was a little disappointed this was the only one in the pass, but over the course of the winter update we did end up getting a few new ones for the Mark 5B core as well. And most of these came with the later events. I'll talk about the events in more detail in their own segment, but the cosmetics that we got, first of all with the Joint Fire event, we had the addition of the JFO helmet, a new helmet attachment, the Violet Crush coating, which is a pretty nice one. We also had some new visors, more shoulder pads, and again just more cosmetics to flesh out this Mark 5B core and to bring back some classic fan favourite armors. And not long after that, we also had the Noble Intention event, which added 2 new coatings being Noble Drifter and Noble Offensive. We also got some more missing shoulder pads, including Recon and Commando. The ultimate reward that week was also the Wedgwood Spriggan coating, so at the end of the update we did end up with quite a few pretty interesting ones for the core. Out of all the ones that were added, Noble Drifter is definitely my favourite. I think it's the most visually interesting, and overall is just a solid coating. There is still a few items for this core that are in the files that are missing, and there's also quite a considerable amount from Reach originally that are yet to make their way into the game, but who knows, maybe they will come eventually. There was a couple of things for the Mark 7 too, but nothing too substantial. We did end up with a Christmas event which brought the Silent Nightcap helmet attachment, the Santa hat. We also got the Reign Supreme, which is the reindeer ears and the red nose. There was also the ornamental chest piece and the candy pane. These were both Christmas themed as to tie into the event. But the clear focus of the winter update was surrounding Halo Reach, which is why most of the cosmetics that were added were all Reach themed. That's why pretty much all of the events that we had. In the Christmas event, we did get a few cool weapon cosmetics too. We got the snowbound weapon coating for the battle rifle, sidekick, and hydra launcher, and honestly, this is one of the best weapon coatings we've seen. We also recently had the Death Hex Twitch drops, which I guess they kind of fit under the category of cosmetics added throughout the winter update. You got these for 5 weapons, being the assault rifle, sidekick, battle rifle, commando, and bulldog, and these look great. One thing was definitely a little bit evident when it came to the cosmetic side of things near the end of the winter update though, and that was that people were getting a little bit tired of the Mark 5B and Reach focus. People did want more for the Mark 7 or for Rikshasi, or just something new, which is why a lot of people are excited to get the SPI and Chimera cores in Season 3. When it comes to customization though, there is one more major thing that is arguably pretty noteworthy, and that is the cadet coatings now being available on every core. This includes Rikshasi, Eagle Strike, and Yoroi, as they were already on the Mark 7 and Mark 5B. This shows that 343 are definitely working on cross-core coatings, and we will definitely see more of that in Season 3 too. This was definitely a great addition, even if it was a small one. I mean, Cadet Grey looks phenomenal on Rikshasi, it makes it look so cool, and it just gave players much more variety. One thing that was also really cool for 343 to do was give every player every core for free. That means if you missed out in the Eagle Strike event, you would now have the core. If you missed out in Yoroi, maybe you started playing during Season 2, you would now have the Yoroi armor core. You wouldn't have any of the extra stuff that came with it, but everyone has access to every single core, and if you wanted more, there was always the option of buying it from the shop. Now, this is clearly the reason they did do it. It means it's easier for them to sell some of these cosmetics because people have access to all of this armor, but that doesn't stop it being a nice gesture. The amount of people I saw using the Yoroi armor after this, it was like playing through the Tenrai event again. It was really bizarre. But I definitely think this is one of the better decisions 343 have made regarding customization, and this should carry through to future seasons too. Which hopefully means as soon as Season 3 launches, every player will have access to the SPI and Chimera cores, and the Battle Pass and Fracture event will just mean you have to unlock the cosmetics, rather than unlock the core itself. But I think that's basically everything of note when it comes to customization. The shop didn't really have anything too interesting. Most of it was repeats from Season 1 and 2, but this isn't a surprise. 343 already stated this would be the case. And I don't really have an issue with it, as there was a few things that returned for much better prices that most people missed out on that I was glad to finally get my hands on, such as the Firefall helmet, which returned for only 200 credits. Anyway, let's move on to our next category. There was a total of 3 events over the course of the winter update, all of which I'd argue were pretty good. 2 of these were announced on the Winter Update Season 3 roadmap, and we knew they would be happening. However, one of these was a surprise, and we have mentioned it earlier, that being the Noble Intentions event. I'll talk about that in a bit more detail after I've spoke about the first 2. Since the Winter Update wasn't a fully fleshed out season like Season 1 or 2, there was no new Fracture event, and obviously there was no new Armor Core. We did get the Winter Update Battle Pass, as I mentioned, but we did get 3 different 2-week events, the first of which being Winter Contingency 2. The first Winter Contingency released during Season 1 and didn't feel all that Christmassy themed, despite it being a Christmas event. We had some like peppermint armor coatings, but as a whole it was a very lackluster event. In order to unlock the cosmetics, they had a bit of an advent calendar system. You had to play a match once a day and you would unlock 1 cosmetic per day. This kind of annoyed a lot of people, as you would have to play for at least 10 days in order to get everything, and I don't really think it achieved the feel that 343 wanted it to. However, Winter Contingency 2 ditched this theme, and I think that was the best call. This time you just had to complete challenges. There was no specific game mode, which was simultaneously disappointing and relieving. You just had to complete normal challenges such as get kills with X weapon, play a certain amount of matches, and you would unlock your Christmas themed cosmetics, with the final item being the Silent Nightcap that we mentioned earlier, which was the Christmas hat that could be used on Cavallano and the Mark 7 helmet. Because there wasn't a mode tied to it or anything like that, there isn't really anything noteworthy I can say. I do kind of wish they'd maybe created snow-themed version of Argyle and Detachment, which were some of the new maps, and we'll speak about them in more detail later on too, as I think that would have added to the festive feeling of things. It was, like I said, it was a bit disappointing that there wasn't really anything to it. It was just, here's a few cosmetics you get by completing challenges, but it was a decent event overall. I don't really have any major complaints. Now, the second event was a little bit more interesting, and that is the Joint Fire event. Joint Fire completely centered around the JFO helmet and its return, but this one did have its own game mode. This mode was Covert One Flag. Now, it has caused a little bit of a divide. By that I mean the vast majority of fans kind of despise it, whereas there's a handful, myself included, who quite enjoy the mode, as it's a bit more of a casual experience but still requires a good level of teamwork and team coordination in order to prevail against your opponents. To summarise, Covert One Flag is just a variant of the regular One Flag game mode, but both teams have different weapons. Defenders have access to the Commando and Energy Sword with infinite threat sensors, whereas the attackers have the Sidekick, Pulse Carbine, but with infinite active camo. It expands upon the asymmetry that One Flag usually has by providing players with different weapons, and adds a new level of strategy in order to win the game mode. My biggest issue with this was that most of the maps didn't really feel like One Flag maps. I think Launch Site was okay. Argyle is an amazing map for One Flag, but I never had the opportunity to play during this event. I felt like the most common one was probably Detachment. But as a whole, I genuinely enjoyed this event and the cosmetics that we had access to, despite the fact that I don't really intend on using any of them. The event pass itself was good and I enjoyed the game mode, although I understand why a lot of people dislike it. At times it does feel a bit unbalanced. I really think the cooldown on the threat sensor and active camo needs to sort of be increased. It should take longer, people shouldn't be able to just spam threat sensors all the time, as then it makes the active camo feel almost entirely useless. But like I said, I did quite like this event. Anyway, moving on to the next one, Noble Intentions. Now this was hinted at during 343's end of year community playdate. They mentioned that they might be doing a February event, however there was no concrete proof. Funnily enough, this one wasn't even really leaked too, not until like a couple of days before it was due to start. This event focused on two Spartan 3s, Spartan Rosenda A344 and Spartan Tom A293, both of which were ex-members of Noble Team, Rosenda eventually being replaced by Emil, and Tom being the ex-Noble 6 that we see in the original Halo Reach trailer, the one who sacrifices his life and blows up the Covenant Corvette or whatever it is. Granted, he does look a little bit different here, but that's because his design is based off of his concept art, rather than his appearance in that Halo Reach trailer. And this is probably for the best, as it makes him a bit more of a distinguishable character. This event did come with a bit of lore tied to it. We got to learn more about these characters who beforehand we knew very little about. But the event itself in-game didn't really come with anything super interesting. Of course, there was another 10-tier pass, which brought back more Reach cosmetics like I mentioned earlier, including the Recon and Commando shoulders, but it technically didn't have any game mode tied to it. However, it did launch alongside the Community Collection playlist for matchmaking, which was basically quick play, but you could play it on certain hand-picked community-created Forge maps. These included Salvation, Perilous, Starboard, and Absolution, all four of which are pretty solid maps, and it did make a pretty fun playlist. Like I said, it basically was just quick play, but you got to play it on some cool maps, two of which were remakes of fan favourites, and it was just a nice surprise that added some good level of variety. A lot of players regarded this one as the best event yet because of that playlist's addition. Even though it technically wasn't a part of the event, you didn't have to play that playlist in order to complete your challenges. You could do it on Big Team Battle, you could do it on Fiesta, you could do it on anything, but because it did come out at the same time, most people kind of just group the two together, which is understandable. And again, Noble Intentions was a pretty solid event. Not forcing people to play a specific game mode is definitely pretty beneficial when it comes to these challenges. People seem to enjoy it a lot more as they can just progress the way that they want to. But in that same regard, sometimes I do believe it is a little bit better to have a mode or playlist tied to an event, as it just makes it a bit more interesting. Anyway, that sums up the 3 events that we had over the winter update, so let's move on to our next category. We had a total of 3 new maps added within the winter update, these being Detachment, Argyle, and Empyrean, which is the remake of Halo 3's Pit. All 3 of these maps were made entirely in Forge by employees at 343, and personally I think all 3 are pretty good for their own reasons. The first 2 that were added were Detachment and Argyle. These were added the day of the winter update, with Empyrean coming a little bit later on. Argyle did have its fair share of issues when that came out, as it was causing a lot of people to crash anytime a match loaded up, but 343 got this fixed relatively quickly, and I've actually only played this one in matchmaking once. The first time I got it was a couple days after the winter update came out, but my game crashed, and I only actually recently got to play this one in matchmaking, but obviously I've played it a few times in customs, so I have the gist of the map itself, and it's pretty good. This is the one that I wasn't actually looking forward to. I really wished it was Forerunner themed. It looked like it was just going to be another boring UNSC themed map, but it turned out to be a lot of fun and is perfect for Capture the Flag. Like, this map was born for Capture the Flag. It works pretty well with Covert 1 flag, but normal CTF is so unbelievably intense in here. It is amazing. Detachment ended up disappointing me quite a bit. I still like the map, but out of the two, this is the one that I was much more hyped for, but when I ended up playing on it, it didn't really live up to my expectations. Now, it does some unique things. I like the use of the man cannons and the teleporter, and it's really good for modes like Strongholds. Zone-based modes work super well here. Maybe it just annoyed me that I kept getting this map for Covert 1 flag, and it just doesn't work for an asymmetric mode like that. It works okay for regular CTF, it's pretty solid for Slayer, but personally I think Strongholds is where this map really shines. But these were both genuinely pretty solid, and I definitely liked their inclusion. The third map was Empyrean. This, again, like I said, being the Pit remake. This was shown off at the HCS Worlds event, and it definitely disappointed a few people. When it was shown off, people weren't exactly happy with the look 343 had gone for, but what really didn't help was the way they sort of marketed it. They were like, oh, we've got a world premiere, we've got something really cool to show off. People thought there was going to be at least a couple of maps, and it turned out to only be the one. But when it did release, people were pretty happy. They did give it a bit of a redesign from when it was originally showcased, and although I wasn't super happy with this change, the map itself is a lot of fun. And it looks really good too. It is the only map in matchmaking that actually uses the scrap cannon, which is one of my favourite weapons to use. The scrap cannon is so fun. Granted, they did remove this from the ranked version, and that's pretty understandable. The Pit's never been one of my favourite maps, but its inclusion in Halo Infinite was definitely a good one. This was the first classic map to actually make its way into matchmaking. Yes, it is a Forge remake rather than an official, like, one made with dev tools, but that doesn't really discredit anything. The map itself is just really fun to play on, and I'm so happy that it's here. Like I said, it got added a little bit later on. This actually came with the addition of the cross-core cadet coatings, and when 343 gave all the cores out for free, that was alongside this update that added the Pit, and it was a good update overall. But those were the three maps. The only thing that really let me down was that there was nothing for Big Team Battle. We did get the Community Collection playlist, which again was just arena maps. We had 3 new maps added, all of which were arena maps, which means BTB just starts feeling staler and staler as time goes on, as it gets pretty much no love from 343. BTB maps are much more difficult to make. They're bigger, and balancing on BTB is completely different. The sandbox almost feels like it functions in a completely different way, so I understand why BTB maps are much less frequent. The mode itself is also a lot less popular. More people tend to prefer arena as it's quicker and much more action-packed and fast-paced. But as someone who primarily plays BTB, I can't help but feel a little disappointed that we pretty much got no content for BTB. Not a new game mode, not a new map, pretty much nothing. At least, not officially. Which moves us on to our next category. The biggest and best addition to the winter update was the long-awaited arrival of Forge. 343 finally handing the tools to the players in order to allow themselves to forge new maps and modes, creating a plethora of new ways to play Halo Infinite. 343 showed us what was capable with Forge mode with the addition of Detachment and Argyll, being able to create some pretty nice looking maps that are fun to play on, and this was definitely just a good showcase of what could be achieved. There was also a few player-made experiences made by members of the Forge Council that were ready to play day one, including a remake of Haven. It didn't take players long to start creating some amazing things in Forge. People created a ton of different maps, some of which felt official, they looked amazing, such as Nemesis, some of which were a bit more wacky and creative, like Game Night or Peach's Castle. But I think it's safe to say that Infinite's Forge is quite possibly the best version out of any Halo game. Granted, it does have some clear issues. Forge has released in beta, so these issues are understandable. It's technically still in a pretty early state. The main issue that I notice is sometimes when you play a match, textures just won't load in, which can really ruin the atmosphere. But stuff like this will be fixed, and 343 are only going to continuously build on Forge in future. They've already confirmed we'll be able to use campaign AI in Forge mode. We'll have rising water levels. We'll be able to scale particle effects. And there's a lot of other things sure to come in the future. I've even made a couple of Forge maps myself, granted they're no masterpiece. I made a map called the Amphitheater, which was sort of just for me to test out Forge and see what I could achieve. And then I also helped my dad and brother to make our own remake of Gridlock from Gears of War, this being Gridlock 2560. This one I am genuinely a bit proud of. Granted, I can't take all the credit. Like I said, I worked on it with my brother and my dad. But I definitely think we did a solid job at achieving the feel of Gridlock, but giving it a good Halo transition rather than just trying to make it look and play like Gridlock. We tried to make it a Halo version of Gridlock. I'm totally not talking about these to try and promote my own maps or anything. But genuinely, the reception around Forge was nothing but positive. People were super happy about its inclusion, and we're still getting amazing creations almost every day. One of the more recent ones that comes to mind is the Forsaken Battle Royale, made by Sergeant Avil and Blink. This is one that I was lucky enough to get the chance to playtest, and got to stream it the day before it actually released. They've managed to create a pretty solid battle royale in Forge in Halo Infinite, and I definitely recommend trying this one out. Not only does it look good, but it's super fun to play, and they managed to do some pretty creative things. And I'm sure there'll be many more amazing Forge creations yet to come, especially when we get some of these additional features. I mean, people will basically be able to create their own campaign levels, which is insane to think about. And people have used Forge to bring back classic modes such as Infection. We will obviously get them officially at some point down the line, but Forge is a pretty good substitute for now. Anyone that's craving classic maps like Blood Gulch or Hang 'em High, well, chances are there's a Forger that's already got you covered. Maybe you want something completely different. Maybe you want to play a racing game inside of Halo. Well, people have got that sorted too, as people have created various different tracks, whether they be original or recreations of like Mario Kart tracks or something along those lines. There is likely to be something for anyone here in the Forge browser, and I cannot wait to see where things go with it in future. Moving on to our next category, we have the return of another long-awaited arrival, and that is co-op campaign. I don't really have as much to say about this one. I was pretty excited at first, as now I could play through the campaign again, but with friends, and this is true, it's great. Infinite's campaign is already amazing, and being able to experience its open world with other players is definitely quite the treat. Yes, I do have some problems with it. I wish there wasn't really a border keeping everyone stuck together. I wish I could go as far as I wanted away from people, as that way it would be fun to tackle different side missions at the same time, being able to work together in order to complete some of these side objectives as quick as possible and obtain different pieces of loot. But that wasn't enough to sway me from my overall enjoyment of the experience. I'm still yet to finish a co-op playthrough, but it was just a good excuse to go back through Infinite's campaign. It definitely sucked that co-op was something we had to wait this long for. I think had it been there straight away, then people would have enjoyed Infinite's campaign much more. But regardless, I'm still glad that it made it in eventually, even if it came with the scrapping of split screen. That was definitely a huge blow to many fans, but I do think that co-op campaign is a lot of fun on Infinite. The final category to talk about is additional features, things that I don't think were big enough to have their own category, but were still pretty important features to come to the game. The first of which being Match XP. This sounds like a weird one to have to talk about, but the only way to level up beforehand in Season 1 and 2 of Infinite was by completing challenges, and this annoyed a lot of people, as you kinda had to play the game in a way you didn't want to. You were forced to play specific modes or use specific weapons in order to level up, and you weren't really awarded for your performance. You could have a game where you go 40 kills and 10 deaths, and you get the same amount of XP as everyone else. You could get less if you completed no challenges. But 343 finally added Match XP. Again, in beta, there's still some things that they'll likely tweak in the future, but this was just such a great addition. Because of this, they did actually reduce the amount of XP you could gain from challenges and kind of changed how they worked, actually making the challenges a lot easier, but reducing the amount from 20 to 10. I don't really think this is a bad thing either, as it means it's much easier to acquire ultimate rewards, even if you don't get as much XP from the challenges themselves, and you don't get as much XP overall because you had more challenges to complete. But now you actually get XP from completing matches, and depending on your performance, you get awarded a bit extra. If you're the top player in the lobby, you get the MVP bonus, which is like an extra 50 XP. If you finish on the top 50% of your team, you get extra XP. For finishing a match, you get XP. This definitely made the Winter Update Battle Pass pretty easy to grind through. It did not take long at all to get through this. People did it pretty much straight away. And I'm curious to see if this will affect Season 3 and how quickly I complete that in any sort of way. The other big additional feature that was added was the Community Customs Browser, which basically means that anyone that's got a Forge lobby open, you can join their match. This makes it a lot easier to experience some of these Forge maps that I've spoken so much about. You just hop on the customs browser, there'll be a bunch of people hosting lobbies, and you can join any of them. Funnily enough, this was a feature that wasn't supposed to arrive during Season 3, but they actually surprise dropped it during the Winter Update alongside the Pit and the Cross-Core Cadet coatings. This, again, was a great addition. I just wish 343 had done a bit more to advertise it. Had people known it was coming out during the Winter Update, they would have probably been a bit more excited for it. Although the hype around it when it was sort of shadow dropped was still relatively high. And I think that pretty much sums up all of the major things that happened across the Winter Update. I was going to make a section dedicated to modes and the Battle Pass itself, but I think I've already spoken about them enough as is. And I think with this Battle Pass just being a lot shorter, it didn't really warrant having its own category. And again, with the only new game mode being Covert 1 flag, I spoke about that enough when I covered it in the events section. But what rating would I give the Winter Update as a whole? Out of everything I've spoke about, what rating would I give this update? Well, I think I'm going to have to give it an 8.5. It's definitely been the best thing to happen to Infinite since it launched. It added so much content, so many big things like Forge, like co-op, gave us access to a ton of awesome cosmetic items, gave us a new mode, gave us new maps, so many great things. The only reason it's not higher is because it did still leave a lot to be desired, and some of those features did launch in a bit of a mess. Like I said, Argyle wasn't even really playable on matchmaking when it came out. Forge still has some considerable issues, although it is still amazing. And there was no big team battle content, which really let me down. But other than those things, the Winter Update was still a massive W, and it was a very clear improvement for 343's live service model, and it shows people that 343 can make this live service game work. It's just unfortunate it's taken this long for things to start to happen. But now Season 3 is just around the corner, and I can't wait. I really need some BTB stuff. The new map looks great, and having a new weapon is going to be amazing. But let me know down in the comments what rating you would give the Winter Update. Have you enjoyed it? Have you not enjoyed it? And if so, tell me why. Anyway, folks, thank you all for watching this very long video, and I will catch you all in the next one.